John Kiriakou is a former CIA officer, and he joins us tonight. John, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You worked at CIA for a long time under John Brennan, who ultimately backed your prosecution, for which you were sent to prison for a crime that I don't think would be considered a crime today. So tell me, with that perspective, your reaction to watching John Brennan trotted out before the cameras daily almost for the last 2 years as an expert on the Russia conspiracy.
I think this was scandalous for a number of reasons, the most important of which is that John Brennan has repeatedly used the word treason, the word traitor, when describing the president. Treason is a death penalty charge. Is he seriously saying, or has he been saying, that the president ought to be executed for something having to do with a scandal that really never existed? To me, John Brennan just simply is not a serious person. He shouldn't be taken seriously by us or by anybody else. And I'm going to get a little bit personal here, too. I worked with John Brennan for many, many years. I always thought that he was in over his head intellectually, and I think he's proven that repeatedly in his responses and reactions to the news coming out of this investigation.
You know, it's funny you said that. I think the default assumption for most people, including me, is that the director of the CIA is a very smart man.
The best and the brightest.
It's a very complex job.
It is.
I've watched him closely in his public performances over the past couple of years, and I've concluded that he's not very bright. I'm not attacking him.
No,
it's okay.
That's an observation.
But it's clearly the case. How does a guy like that run the CIA? How do you get that job?
You get that job by latching on to George Tenet before George Tenet even entered the CIA. John Brennan in the 1990s was George Tenet's briefer when George was at the National Security Council as the director of intelligence programs. And so when George became the deputy director of the CIA, he took John over with him and then just promoted him through the ranks until he was practically cabinet level. I mean, that's how senior
So just pure
he became.
cronyism is what
That's
you're saying.
all it was, and it took less than a decade. He was on a rocket ride to the top of his career track at the CIA.
So now I guess the result of all of this stuff that we've watched for a couple of years is that the ordinary person, me, everyone else, knows that these agencies are run by people who are much less impressive than we thought, with political agendas, and in some cases are ruthless and cruel. You're one of the people who felt the sting of that. You went to prison.
I did, thanks to John Brennan.
Guys like Roger Stone are headed to prison because of that. Where are the pardons here? I mean, is it time for the executive branch to send a really clear message? We're going to stop the destruction of innocent people by completely out-of-control bureaucrats.
I think it is the time for pardons. I heard Senator Lindsey Graham say earlier today that pardons probably would not be met very well right now in the United States Senate. I think he's wrong. I think that the American people understand that people have been wronged. Look at Mike Flynn, what that poor guy has gone through. Look at Roger Stone. You know, these are all process felonies, Tucker. We talked about this once before. These are felonies that really didn't exist until these people were thrown into this investigation.
That's exactly right.
They're crimes that would never have been committed otherwise. Since the investigation has come to naught, I think it's time to wipe the slate clean.
And by the way, it doesn't make sense not to pardon people.
I agree.
You think this is a scam and a hoax, and the people in charge are
slate
illegitimate,
clean.
then you have an obligation to make it right by pardoning the people who are wronged, and I hope you're on that list.
Thank you so much.
Great to see you tonight. Thank you.
The pleasure is always mine.
Joining me now, Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume. Brit, welcome. Good to have you with us tonight. It is stunning to watch how far out John Brennan, as the former CIA director, was willing to go before Mueller's report was finished.
Yeah, and every word he spoke during this whole period carried the sort of the implicit sense that he, as the former CIA chief, was somebody who was in the know, who had some special knowledge, and who should be taken seriously. And boy, was he by certain news outlets, and it turns out he was utterly and completely wrong. From the get-go, he was wrong. He misread the whole situation, and he led thankfully not our news organizations, but many others down a path toward a dead end. and that is where this has ended up. I'm glad to hear him say that he got it wrong, but it's too little too late in his case, in my view.
This is a tweet that he put out today. While the Trump campaign engagements with the Russians were highly inappropriate, we need to accept Special Counsel Mueller's finding that evidence of criminality was not established, and he did, as you say, Britt. He said he's one of the few who was speaking the way he was speaking, who says that he's glad to hear that the investigation cleared the American president of any of this kind of nefarious entanglement.
Yeah, a lot of other media have gone to their new corner to defend themselves now, and the new line seems to be hey, what did you want us to do? Not cover the story? It was a big story, and it was an important story, and we were just reporters covering the story. That's what Jeff Zucker was saying over at CNN. You heard that from Margaret Sullivan in the Washington Post and a number of others. And the trouble with it is that misses the entire point. Yes, there were some of the reporting that was done was bad. There were a number of bad stories. We had CNN got caught out a couple of times. We had the Daily Beast saying Mueller is telling us that he's got Trump on collusion. The list of bad stories is fairly long. But beyond that, it wasn't just that they were covering a story. It was the sheer volume of the coverage, the sheer weight given to it. Every little turn and detail in the story conveyed the unmistakable sense that this was going somewhere and it was going to unearth something very serious about our president and his campaign. That it was bound to turn out that way. You couldn't escape it. It was everywhere. It was all around you. And it wasn't just the news columns. It was the editorial pages. It was the commentators on television and in print. And they were nearly all pointing in the same direction in the mainstream media, and they got it wrong, completely wrong.
Here's Joe Scarborough, who is one of those who was listening to John Brennan, and it strikes me as you're talking, Britt, that he was a person of great authority. He was the former head of the CIA,
right?
And he was telling all of them every single day that with sort of a twinkle in his eye, look, I know what's going on here, folks. So you can come along this ride with me, and you will not be disappointed. Here's Joe Scarborough.
So save your breath, all right? We're not going to divert our eyes. This president lies more than any other president in the United States. We're not going to divert our eyes. Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead, follow the story where it leads us.
Well, I'm all for following the story where it leads you, as long as you're leading it in the right direction. It led, in this case, it led to a dead end. I don't know what he's so proud of and so defiant about. I mean, wasn't his program one of the ones which was leading the charge on this, where John Brennan had an audience many times? I think so. And when the White House put out that notice yesterday suggesting to producers that you not put some of these people who've gotten it so wrong so often on all the time, I don't think we should take our booking instructions from the White House, but the list that the people that they mentioned there were people who had got it wrong, and over and over again. And and it might not be a bad idea for journalists who are worried about what happened here to say, well, maybe we shouldn't listen to these people in the future. Maybe we shouldn't have them on so much. Not because the White House says it, but because of the record they composed.
There was a piece in the New York Times today by David Brooks, and he was saying that he felt like people like Beto O'Rourke and John Brennan owe the president a public apology. If you call someone a traitor and it turns out that you lacked evidence for that charge, then the only decent thing to do is apologize. You think he'll be waiting a long time?
Oh, I think, well, the rate this is going, I certainly think so. Although you're beginning to hear from certain seasoned politicians and even some liberal journals the idea is, come on, folks, this is a dead horse. Stop beating it, particularly to Democratic politicians. Stop beating it. Move on to things that people care more about, because, you got an election coming up and you want to have something to run on beyond an investigation that turned up essentially nothing.
We should all be rejoicing the Mueller report money suck has finally concluded, even if it shows the president never colluded. But how on sweet fat Neptune did we get here? For years we've been told by secretive power hoarders we need to compromise some of our hot freedom for security. Civil libertarians have always known that hogwash claim was stinkier than week-old trout jam. And we have warned, we've been warned, and we've been warning about compromising liberty in the name of safety. It is the falsest paradigm. And when you concentrate on godly resources in the hands of a few devils, all hell is bound to break loose. Easy spying is supposed to nab bad guys. But what happens when the small cabal of desperate men who head the security state see the future president as the bad guy? How hard would it be to launch an investigation on the flimsiest pretense as an insurance policy and then leak the right information to the press to launch a special counsel investigation with an unlimited budget, hardly any oversight, and the ordination of the media? Sadly, it was all too easy, as four angry men couldn't contain their contempt for the president and their glee at his downfall. Ethics and constitutionality be damned. Former director of national intelligence and known congressional perjurer James Clapper was an early adopter of the Trump as Russian asset narrative. And having mastered the art of secretly and warrantlessly spying on innocent Americans and amassing unfathomable amounts of personal information, Clapper knows a thing or two about sneakery. Fired former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe parroted the Trump asset claim just last month, even though he was fired for leaking like a full diaper in a hot tub. And then lied to his lurchian boss, James Comey, who was fired for being a self-serving giraffe nerd. Comey's boundless self-aggrandizing allowed him to pit his heroic self against the evil, illegitimate President Trump, as he implied over and over the president was compromised and needed defeat in an electoral landslide. Let me guess, Jim, you have your awkward jersey on under that suit and can sub in as the Democratic presidential nominee anytime, huh, pal? Well, the craziest bat in the barn was, of course, former CIA Director John Brennan, whose hatred and vitriol have been limitless, as he's called the president a traitor, accused him of treason, and seemed very confident in his bad intel that the president and his kids would be arrested as part of Mueller's last gasp. None of this has happened, but people are now finally asking how we got here in the first place, and hopefully all rational skeptics will conclude that too few people have too much power, and when it's easily abused, lives are ruined. Just ask these four unemployed dolts who can attest that from their worst laid plans, and that's the memo.